Okay, well, we'll get started. Good afternoon, everybody. I almost said good morning. My name is Beth Deuermeyer. I am the Education Concierge here at Innovation Partners. And I would like to give everyone joining us today a big warm welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to learn about SBIR and STTR programs with us this afternoon, and then for the next two Wednesday afternoons as well. We do have 3 sessions. This is one of 3. I would really like to especially thank the staff and faculty from across our campus who have been planning this event with me and our office since early fall. Those people, especially are Lene Scroggins, who is on here as a panelist today. She's also presenting for us. Could not have done this without you, Lene, so thank you. And I would also like to say thank you to Dr. Mark Benden, and you will see Mark on our last session. He will be moderating our expert panel. And then Wei Wan, who is our licensing manager, our senior licensing manager here at Innovation Partners. She was also a big help for us, as well as Megan Brown and Lene, I'm sorry, I already said Lene, but Mike Scherer, who you're going to hear from here in just a moment. So just a few housekeeping things. If you are a student and you're on here with us, make sure that you download the Maroonbase app. This is a Maroonbase event, and you get 200 points every time you log in for this event. And those points go towards a monthly drawing where every month 3 students will win a prize of $500 each. And this prize money is funded by one of our former students, which we're really excited about. So all you have to do to get started is to download the Maroonbase app from either iOS or the Google Play Store. Just create your account and then check in anywhere within 15 minutes before our presentation begins, and you'll get your points for that. And if you have any questions about Maroonbase, you can always just email maroonbase@tmu.edu. And then just a couple housekeeping reminders. There is a difference between the Q&A box and the chat box. So please, this may look a little different for you if you're used to just regular Zoom meetings. If you look at the bar along the bottom or the top of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box and a chat box. So the Q&A box is where you're going to drop your questions for the panelists, and we will either answer these live or we will answer them by typing the answer to your question. So you can always see, as attendees, you can see what questions are still open and which ones have been answered. Okay, and then also keep in mind that this is a public and recorded event. So just keep that in mind when you're typing in your questions or making a chat box. And then just know that we will provide a digital copy of the PowerPoints at the end of the presentation. They will be made available to you, as well as a recording. And so I'm going to turn it over and let Michael Scherer, who is our Associate Vice President for Commercialization, just say a few words. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'll just be brief, just to have a few words. And Beth, do I have to do anything? Do
Nope.
I share? I don't.
Nope, you don't need to share a screen.
All right. All right. I just wanted to say good afternoon to everyone and welcome you all to the virtual SBIR STTR webinar. And thank you for showing up to the event. And I did want to make sure to mention, I mean, I think it's very obvious from my background, everyone's background, but this event is being brought to you by the T's Commercialization Office, Division of Research and Innovation Partners. My name is Michael Scherer. I'm the head of Innovation Partners. And for people who don't know, hopefully people know, but Innovation Partners does the IP management, IP licensing, and new venture development activities for Texas A&M University. And that's where we have a particular interest, of course, in SBIR and STTR, as it helps us do more startup companies. So that's a little bit about our office. And I do want to make sure to give a very special thanks to Beth for all her hard work. She really led this effort, pulled it all together, and really took ownership of the whole project. And I'm very pleased with all that. So thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Mike. And I see we also have Georgia Kimball's on here. She is with the Division of Research. I want to thank her also for all of her help that she has done in helping us put this together. So thank you, Georgia. And thank you, Mike, for that introduction. So like I said, we are really excited to have everyone. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to you, Lene.
Okie doke. 1 second here. Let me get things shared. How's that? Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
All right. And I'm not muted, so all of that is good. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I know I'm being a bit repetitive, but I also want to thank everybody today that has signed up and come to our event. I want to thank everybody that has, all my committee members that have put on this event. This really truly started like many small businesses do. It started on a napkin over a glass of wine that we decided we really needed to do this. Everybody's wanting to do it, and we decided to collaborate, as Beth said and Mike said, across many divisions of the university and system. And it just has been really a great partnership to work on. Okay, a little about me. Many of you probably don't know me, you've never heard of me, and probably you'll never hear of me again. So I'll give you a little bit of my history. I've been working in management and leadership positions in various industries for about 40 years. In the last 20 years, I've been in and around higher education, specifically Texas A&M. And I have been the business manager for several SBIR startups here in the Bryan College Station area and out of state. Currently, I am the vice chair of the Texas A&M New Ventures competition. This is where I would like to see many of you, when you start your spin outs and form a company, get to the point you can apply to our competition in the future. That's one of the end results I would like to see out of this. In addition, I'm a program specialist for the Office of Commercialization and Entrepreneurship. I've been there for going on 4 years now, and I work with Sora Biswas, which I know many of you know. And a side note, my side gig is I'm also the business manager of an A&M engineering spinout named Shape Memory Medical. They're actually out in the Bay Area of California. So I really want this to be a very basic conversation about SBIRs. Many of you already have this level of understanding, but if you don't, I want to cover it real quick with you. The SBIR STTR program is decades old. It was a congressional effort to put federal money into helping innovate research into commercialization, as well as helping small businesses do that rather than just innovate out of a federal lab. So it's been around since, I believe, 1982. And it's a very competitive program. Both SBIR and STTR are very competitive, as you might imagine. But again, it's about encouraging federal research, state research to work with small business and to help fund that gap to get things from the basic laptop bench out into what I call the shelf at Walmart, so that we can actually better society and help the public with it. So these are the agencies. This is your first eye chart for today. These are the 11 agencies that all have small business technology transfer and small business innovation research programs. So let me back up. All of these have SBIR programs. There are 5 agencies that also have STTR, and those are in the gray. So all of them have SBIR. The gray ones also have an STTR program. So SBIR and STTR is made up really into 3 phases. Most of you here are interested and thinking about starting a company so you can apply for a phase 1. And With a successful phase 1, then you are encouraged and asked to apply for a phase 2. That's where some of the money can get. I mean, the phase 1 money can be very real and it is a big help to a company. Phase 2 money can be really significant when you look up into, you know, six, 7-digit figures for a company. And it is non-dilutive funding, which if you don't understand non-dilutive, that means that nobody is taking a stake in your company. You do have milestones that you need to reach, but this isn't something you have to pay back. Then there is a phase 3, which does not have any funding from the government, not through the SBIR or STTR program. However, you could, if you get to phase 3, you can work with that agency and there are other funding mechanisms that may be able to provide you with some support. So a couple of main differences. There are several differences. These are two that seem to come into question quite a bit. The STTR program, you must engage with a research institution. So that's going to be particularly interesting to this group. The SBIR does not require it, though it's very common to have a research, sponsored research agreement with a research partner, but the STTR requires it. So thinking about you being a researcher in a lab at a federal or state funded research institution, STTR is really one of the ways for you to think about commercializing your research, but also still having your lab be involved in it. SBIR, you do not need to have a research partner. You can do it all inside your own company. You may have a research partner, but it's not required. STTR, you have to have a research partner. Additionally, there are different minimums and maximums for PI involvement. There's different minimums and maximums for the amount of research going on, whether it is in the small business concern side or in the research side. Okay, here is another overview of the programs. The key thing to remember here is where the PI needs to reside. The company, you need to remember, is the one that is going to apply for the grant. The research institution is not eligible to ever apply for an SBIR or STTR. So when you are thinking about forming the company and thinking about which grant to apply for, you need to think about where the primary employment is of the PI is going to reside. In the SBIR, more than 50% or more has to reside with the company. On the STTR side, the PI still may be employed with the research institution, or it can be the company. So those are two very big differences in the SBIR and STTR. Oh, excuse me. Oh, sorry. Another kind of common misunderstanding, research institutions, again, cannot apply for either one of these programs. These programs were set up by the government to help businesses form and provide gap funding for innovation and research and development. So the R&D is an important acronym here. So it's not only research, but it is supposed to move forward to development or commercialization. And a lot of times the STTR, I think, is thought of as being a way to do basic research, even if you're inside a company, but it is not. It is still focused on commercialization. And the overarching goal of it is to provide a path forward from basic research into a commercializable product. Sorry, my cursor is a little too sensitive today. So what does an SBIR STTR company look like? Again, I want you to think about this as a company. Don't think about it as being a researcher inside your research lab here at A&M. So the company must be a for-profit institution. It needs to be owned and operated in the United States, and it can be, and only can be, a small business concern, which is actually an acronym, a small business concern, which means a company with under 500 people. All the work must be performed in the United States. So those labs that have transactions in labs out of this country, that can't be considered. It has to be work performed in the United States, both with the company and with the lab side. The focus is on performing research and development toward commercialization. The focus is not purchasing equipment. It is not trying to commercialize a technology that's already been developed, or it's at very low risk and you only need capital. And the fourth most important thing is that company needs to have plans for additional funding to pay for things that the government grants won't. And there are several things that it won't pay for. We will get into those next week. We have an expert from the Small Business Development Corporation down at U of H in Houston that will cover some of that in more detail. But this is basically the structure of a company. You need to be a company, you need to be in the US, you need to be small. The work needs to be here. You need to have something that you're really trying to do R&D on. And you need to have a way or plans for funding outside of the government program to pay for things that it won't. For example, intellectual property. And you'll get to take these slides with you, but here is a page of federal resources and local resources I put together. The SBIR.gov website, if you don't already have it bookmarked, you should. It has a plethora of information. It has got tutorials on every section of the SBIR grant to help you through it. There's lots of different areas for different topics. It will teach you how to search for solicitation topics. There is a solicitation planner. So if you're working with the Air Force and they have 2 deadlines a year, you'll know what those deadlines are and you can start your work in plenty of time in advance. The SBA is the partner to the government for this program. And also, once you get into this, don't be afraid to reach out and talk to the program officer in the program that you're looking for. You do not have to have a grant with them for them to talk to you. They're very anxious to award these grants. So they want to talk to you and help you write the best application you can. Locally, we have the Brazos Valley Small Business Development Corporation. They, again, are a terrific resource to you if you need anything answered about your company structure. Do I want to be an LLC or a corporation? What kind of accounting package do I need to get? Again, we're going to cover some of that next week, but locally after this, they're a great resource for you. Additionally, our local economic development corporation, known as the Brazos Valley Economic Development Corporation, great group of people over there that want to see businesses be successful in the Brazos Valley, and that means you as well. So I think with that, I can conclude. And I like this little saying that I put on here, this quote from Michelangelo. I saw the angel in the marble and I carved until I set him free. I really see all of you in the audience today as artists because you're brilliant scientists. And I know you see the angel in the marble, and I'm excited for you to just carve until you set it free for the benefit of humanity. So without any further ado, I guess I will take questions if there are any.
Lene, do you know, does the Brazos Valley group cover all Texas, or is it just our geographic region?
So are you speaking of, Beth, the Brazos Valley Small Business Development Center or our Economic Development Corporation?
I guess maybe you can answer both.
Okay, yeah. Well, actually, the answer for both is for our region. So there are most regions, all regions across Texas, some are even narrowed down beyond region to city, have economic development organizations that are charged with helping that community. So Houston has their own, Corpus Christi has their own. Ours is a region because, of course, Bryan College Station is a little bit smaller than, say, a Dallas or a Houston. So our EDC encompasses, I believe, a 7-county area, so stretching over to Madisonville and so forth. The Small Business Development Corporation is regional also. So Brazos Valley, that 7-county area. They have one in Houston also. Ours is actually a branch out of Houston, which is also happened to be housed at the University of Houston. So if you happen to be a researcher in, did I see somebody from Kingsville here? You would go look for your local SBDC and your local Economic Development Corporation. Both of them, I'm sure, would be very versed at how to help you with some of the things that you need to do to prepare yourself for having a company that can apply for one of these federal programs.
Okay, thank you. And then we had another question that asked, can you provide examples of successful initiatives? I'm not sure if that's you or maybe if Saurabh or Chris will answer that.
I can't, I mean, I don't know what does a successful initiative mean exactly? Getting an SBIR grant would be, I would consider a successful initiative. Are you looking for success stories of companies that have done well and grown because of this program?
I think she mentioned grants. Not sure.
Okay. If they can clarify that, any three of us would be happy to answer it. I mean, I personally know companies that have made great strides and leaps and bounds by working hard and receiving grants. We have one local company here in the Brazos Valley, for you that are local, that I'm sure many have heard of, is Lintech. And it was started more than 20 years ago, and for many, many years operated solely on SBIR grants. So they didn't take any dilutive funding. And at one point, that company was the largest SBIR recipient in the country here in our area. So that's a example of a very successful, if that's what they're asking. I suspect that might not be what they're asking, but if they can clarify it, Saurabh or I could answer.
Okay. And guys, just a reminder, the Q&A box is not where you should be chatting with people. So if you can send people direct messages in the chat box. Could A&M faculty work for the small business when fully employed for 9 months?
I will get to those questions in my presentation. So okay. I think once I go through my presentation, some of these questions will be answered.
Okay. All right. Well, then we're going to go ahead and kick it over to Saurabh. And then if you still have questions that you think Lene could answer, stick around. She will be here at the end when we can do more Q&A after Saurabh and Chris's presentation.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Saurabh Biswas. I'm Executive Director at the Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station. So I certainly want to thank everyone you see in the panel. At the same point, a lot of people who don't see here today, we don't see them, but they have made this possible. So it's a combination of multiple offices across the campus. At the same point, we are really welcoming everyone from Texas A&M family and also external partners in the ecosystem. Along with that, companies who would like to partner with us in this process. So this is something you will see over the next 2 weeks. The goal of this program is not to get into nitty-gritty of every agency, but we are trying to provide you a brief overview of the program itself. My presentation will be focused on 2 constituencies, external and internal. External, those who want to partner with Texas A&M, and internal for our faculty, research scientists, postdocs, and graduate students who want to participate in this program. Now, this is something we hope that this is going to trigger enough interest that you will be reaching out to us after the program, and we can work with you one-on-one in helping you with specific questions. So my background before I get into my presentations, I've been in the space in the intersection of technology and business for almost 2 decades now. My background is in healthcare. So as an inventor, I've worked on multiple medical devices that have gone on to startup companies, been a founder in 5 startup companies. And key thing, the point I want to make there, 3 of them received SBIR. And I can tell pretty confidently without SBIR, some of these companies wouldn't have made it. And that's the reason I'm so passionate about presenting to early stage innovators and companies that the gap fund, as Lene mentioned, that's the biggest challenge for a startup company. Raising a Series C certainly sounds like a big amount of money, but if the biggest challenge is to get to the first million or first $5 million. And that's what we are trying to build our infrastructure and the support system to help you do that. In the technology translation role, I've been involved in multiple different startups helping Texas A&M system companies, have seen pretty much everything in terms of term sheets, license agreements, and certainly very eager to help anyone who is going through this process and work with my colleagues across the system. And my passion is also in doing research. So certainly I try to find time working on new medical devices. And one of the things I really try to do is mentor our next generation of PhDs and postdocs. Certainly our country needs a lot more technology entrepreneurs. So anybody who needs to talk to me about those things, I passionately try to help them. So with this background, I feel I'll be able to provide you some insight in terms of how for a faculty member or researchers within Texas A&M, what are the steps you can take to be in a process where you have an SBIR grant, you are starting an SBIR company, what steps you need to take. And also I will touch upon briefly for external partners, what you need to do to come and work with us. Again, we are not going to get into every details because of time constraints, but over the next 2 weeks, we'll get to see a lot of these examples, how they pan out, and see some real case studies during that time. So I will not get into details of each agency, but I want to mention this is a $2.5 billion opportunity. So when we talk about SBIR, they look like $50,000, $100,000. But when you add up the 11 agencies, the federal agencies, they're giving every year $2.5 billion focused on extremely high-risk commercialization research and product development. So the understanding here is not doing something which is incremental, but trying to bring to market which has high risk, which has an academic component in case of STTRs. At the same time, they could be disruptive too. So it is something which annually companies are getting. It's an opportunity which all of us have, and we want to provide you enough knowledge base to come and work with us to make this happen. So just to get into some numbers so that you have an understanding of when we throw out the word $2.5 billion or 11 agencies, you can see that in this kind of few graphics which are taken from US government CSR reports. Over the 1983 to 2021, you can see how the numbers have changed because legislation allows up to 3.2% of a agency's budget to be given out as an SBIR and STTR. So in 2021, close to $4 billion have been awarded. And this is, most of it is grants. Some of these are contracts too. But most of this money are going to small companies. Now, the definition of small company is someone with less than 500 employees. But most companies who do SBIR are below 100 or below 50. So they are really small companies. In terms of the agencies, as you can see, DoD is certainly the largest agency because they have the biggest budget too. It's a 3.2% of the total budget. So DOE's budget certainly is more than 600 billion plus. So you can see the number from DoD is quite high. But when you look at phase 1 and phase 2 distribution, you can see the numbers, health and human services, where NIH, CDC, FD, and these agencies come. That's number 2. In phase, they are number 1 actually. They're bigger than DoD in phase 1, phase 2, SBIR. And same thing when you go to phase 1 and phase 2, you can see in phase 2 STTR, DoD has higher than HHS. But these are the 2 biggest agencies who are up to 70% of this large $3 billion plus given out annually comes from these agencies. And then you have NASA and NSF, the next 2 big ones, and then you have other agencies. Now, when we are calling them small, we are calling hundreds of millions of dollars. So it is not in any shape or form to discourage you from applying to them, but from a strategy of grant writing, as an inventor, as innovator, you can look at these and try to find agencies or programs that you want to go after. Again, you can see the agencies here in terms of SBIR and STTR funding. One of the things to look at, you can see the SBIR funding, phase 1 is much smaller, but when you go to phase 2, the numbers go quite big. And there are some agencies, all agencies have their own strategies. Some of them have much smaller phase 1 program and very large phase 2 programs. A lot of the contract programs go to phase 2 and phase 3. But again, this is to provide you an insight that when you are getting a phase 1, the chances of you moving to phase 2 is significantly high. And that's where the real money is. $500,000 up to $1 million or more is in the phase 2 stage. So again, these are some statistics for you to look at depending on which agency you want to participate. Distribution by state, you can see that definitely the big chunk of money is going to the coasts. But Texas, this is up to 2017. I'm sure the numbers have changed, but certainly you can see in Texas, we have a tremendous scope to get this number at a much, much higher level in terms of both SBIR and STTR. So as Texas gets around $1 billion a year from these programs, which is significantly high, but at the same time, number of awards is 1,000 plus awards a year. In STTR is 200 plus. So certainly there's an opportunity for us at Texas A&M and including innovators across the state, the small companies, to go after this program in a much more aggressive fashion and get the dollars that we see here. Sorry for the quality of slide, but what I'm really trying to imply in this slide is when I'm talking DOD or DOE, they have a lot of sub-agencies within these larger agencies. So when you go to DOD, it is Air Force, you have AFWorks, you have Army, DARPA, you have Defense Logistics Agency. So these are all separate programs within the DOD. Same with NIH or Human Health and Human Services, you have NIH, CDC, you have FDA. So all these different sub-agencies within a larger agency have programs. So when you're looking for programs to apply, please just don't go to look at FDA. Please go to the specific sub-agencies like Special Operations Command within DOD. They have their own SBIR needs. They have their own programs. The program managers are residing in each of these sub-agencies within the larger agency. So please reach out to them directly, and instead of trying to find at the DOD level because it's too big, you need to have a little bit more focus in terms of what's your goal, what's the product you want to bring to market, and what's the match in terms of the agency needs and the product you're bringing to the market. So this is really in terms of giving you some metrics and statistics that helps you to think through which agency you want to go after, what program managers in which subsectors of these agencies you want to talk to. And certainly at the end of the day, you have to make a decision based on what's your business strategy to move forward in getting to these kind of grants and how that helps you in moving towards the market. So moving on to the next level, we have the two group of audiences. One is external, small and medium-sized businesses who want to work with Texas A&M, or our inventors or faculty researchers partnering with us. And internal, the faculty, research scientists, postdocs who want to take their research out of the university through a company and the plan to apply for an SBIR or STTR program. And one more key thing, which I will talk about, is also as their faculty within Texas A&M system, how can they participate in one of these companies as they spin it out, which is going after either SBIR or angel funding or VC funding, how our system policy allows them to do all of that by abiding certain system rules and regulations. So for the external partners, now why you want to work with university, there are a lot of benefits. You are a pre-existing top-tier research and IP. So certainly Texas A&M system today is a $1 billion plus in external research expenditure. So that money is going into from very basic to applied research. So that provides you a platform to work with inventors and researchers who are doing that work. There are a lot of resources across campus in terms of infrastructure, research labs, and certainly the team. You are getting access to very smart graduate students, postdocs, and certainly our scientists and faculty who become an extended part of your team if you're partnering with them. And one of the critical things in the last bullet points in the first why partner segment is credibility with the program directors. I've been doing this long enough for program directors and program managers. When you reach out to the agency, they are taking a risk with you. So when you're talking to them, one of the things they try to do is understand what's your team's credibility, what's the team's composition. You are applying for not only $50,000 phase 1 or $200,000 phase 1, they look at you as a potential phase 1, phase 2, and beyond company coming to them. So as you're talking to them, they're looking at what is your team, who you want to partner with, what resources you have, and what are your plans long term. So certainly collaborating with the university, if you don't have that scientific, the technology team in the company, but you have an idea you want to move forward with, it provides you that level of credibility when you're reaching out to these program managers and program directors to discuss your project. How to partner? There are multiple ways to do that. You can hire our students after they graduate to work on the projects in the company. It happens quite often. Even the students themselves can take their ideas and go and work in the companies as CTOs, CEOs. That also happens. Access to the intellectual property. As I said, since our research expenditure is $1 billion plus, there's a lot of intellectual property created, which is available to companies from outside to license and take them to market. And certainly the last one is joint R&D. There are multiple mechanisms for companies to work with us to joint R&D, and there are simple agreements in place where the companies can work with our industry offices to put them before they go after these programs. So what are the key steps to do that? Certainly it starts with identify who you want to work with. Now, again, it's a very large school. You have just in engineering, 700 plus faculty across the campus. We have 3,000 to 4,000 faculty members and researchers. So that is something where you can reach out to the commercialization offices, or everything is out on the web. So you can spend some time. There's a scholar.tamu.edu. That's a website where you can go and find every researcher on campus and what research they do. We'll put the link of that one where you can go and access based on search what's the research area of a faculty, and you can directly reach out to them or reach out to the commercialization team. They can put in touch with them. So once you start talking with a researcher where you see an alignment with what you are thinking and the research ideas, certainly the next step is developing a statement of work. And the statement of work has to be aligned with the phase 1, phase 2 goals. So the amount of dollars that you are trying to spend aligns with the work that you are expecting. Now, Lene talked about the split of percentages. I'm not going into that, but you have to be mindful. It's an SBIR and STTR. What is the amount of money that you are going to work with the university? And you need to design the statement of work based on that. Once you have the statement of work, you reach out to the contracts and grants office, and through that you have the final budget. Now, different agencies have different requirements. DoD, they require IP allocation documents. NIH, NSF, they don't require that. So it will depend on a very agency-specific need at what you require for that level of application. So certainly the budgets are required in any application that's subcontractor from the university, but other things depending on the grant, whatever is needed. You can work with the commercialization office on that in terms of getting ideas on IP, what kind of IP we already have. If you are a company who wants to get access to IP, but it's not required for phase 1, but when it goes to phase 2, we typically ask companies to have a license agreement in place, and you can discuss term sheet at that point. So these are some of the steps you can take. Again, all these steps, each of them by itself is a longer discussion. But if you are an external company who wants access to a research lab, wants to work with a PI within the university, these are some of the simple steps, which really starts with trying to find who is the person you would like to work with, what is their research background, does it aligns with your company's goals, and directly reaching out to them to start having that conversation. Okay. So next I will reach out to more internal audience here, to our faculty and research scientists, postdocs, and grad students, is why SBIR STTR is something very critical to them. Now, it also matters with our corporate partners too here, the small and medium-sized companies, because a lot of the things what SBIR is funding is not incremental. They're mostly funding disruptive work. They're funding where there's a high risk of failure, because that's the work which is not funded by anyone today. Now, we certainly have angel investment and philanthropic investment, but the level of risk that is being taken at SBIR, US government is the only one taking that risk. So the challenges we have when we are talking about the billions of dollars of basic science that is being funded through the agencies is they all have a certain point at which there is a possibility that the research comes to a screeching halt. And part of it is driven by the intersection of economics and the level of science and the market conditions. So most of the technologies that we work on in universities, they have the requirements you can see on the left. they have a high capital need, they have pretty large, expensive IP portfolio, the R&D cycles are long. So a lot of these things are pretty common to have an SBIR company go through phase 1, phase 2, and then take it to a level you have a proof of concept on which you are raising now private capital. So this is typically a common starting point. This is not something to scare someone. This is why SBIR exists. This is not to have a quick version of an app. This is not to scale up a company or a customer. This is something to really go around with a problem, which is something where you don't have a quick solution to, and you need a group of scientists. That's where the academics come in and solve a fundamental problem. So what we are really trying to do here is move your technology readiness level up. Those of you who have seen this is very commonly used in the world of NASA and DoD. But this also tells you in terms of a scaling, what is the level at which your technology is at the present moment. Now, it is not that complicated. It is not quantitative. It is qualitative, but they kind of broke it from TRL 1 to 9. On the academic side, we are mostly working on TRL 1 and 2. Now, don't hold me in terms of this definition applies to everything. In case of software, you can be quickly in TRL 7 and 7 or 8 within an university. But when we are talking about quantum computing, medical devices, new materials, you're typically TRL 1 or TRL 2 when you are doing the work at the fundamental research level. So where SBIR STTR comes in is how we can really make that transition from TRL 2 to TRL 4 or 5. Because once you are beyond that, you start seeing a lot of industry interest to start coming, either licensing, acquiring, strategic partnership, whatever be the need at that point of time. So you can start seeing those things happening once you're able to elevate the TRL. So what we are trying to do is point at which the basic science funding runs out. And that's when you have to go out and start raise the private capital for doing the R&D, for building your IP portfolio. SBIR STTR provides you that starting point, because it's a great way to combine that funding with some external funding to transition towards the next level of Series A and beyond. And that's what we are trying to do. And that's the biggest strength of having an SBIR STTR in the company. It's non-dilutive. So you're not giving out a chunk of equity at an early stage while you are working on an extremely high risk problem. And that's why that's why it is such a powerful tool. We encourage every faculty to go after if they want to, because there's really no other money out there which is providing you really a risk platform to go and test it out and see that if it pans out. So what we are trying to do here is get up to a point of TRL 4 or 5. And once you are there, we have the angel investment, we have other kind of funding, which is now going to the private sector, private market, where investors are putting money in the company, and that is where the dilutive funding starts. Now somebody is investing in your company after looking at your success in solving some of the critical technical roadblocks, and that money is now coming in to mostly speed up the commercialization. So we are really working at that stage of 2 to 4 again. If you're a researcher or an external company and you're trying to solve a problem in that space, SBIR is a fantastic mechanism for you to go after the proof of concept funding. So what typically is a process here, and this is not something as a process where every bullet points applies to, but for our internal faculty, we are trying to make it a simple stage-by-stage process. And a lot of these things we typically do, but the reason I'm trying to put it in a kind of a simple format is how you should think about when you have a desire to go after an SBIR program. You are middle of your early stage research, and you really want to kind of understand what's the roadmap. I'm here today, how can I go to a point where I have a company which is executing with an SBIR funding? And we had certain things within the university to help you in this process so that you can really execute on your plan in having a company, in taking the company to the next level of funding through SBIR. So what we typically do all the time, and this is something common to every commercialization office, we are looking at your R&D program as it is executing. The external funds are coming, you're working on a research platform, and there is a point at which you make a decision. I really feel that I can make the impact by taking the product to market. Now, this is something doesn't happen every day. It reaches a certain level of research, certain level of proof of concept that you have built now in the lab, where you feel like, okay, why don't I take it to a prototype level for something which is completely what you feel does the theoretical validation, but we need to validate it at different scale or different level. So at that point, we have the ideation stage conversation. And this is something, as I said, the commercialization offices do all the time. Once you reach a point where you feel there is a story behind it, you are coming in, the invention now could be disclosed because you feel like you have solved a problem at a level where you can validate that this is the hypothesis where you started and you have certain solutions to go after. You do an invention disclosure process, which typically triggers the IP prosecution and those kind of decisions. And few things we start do along with that is technology assessment, market assessment, team assessment. Now, why we do these things? Because once you make a decision that you want to build a company, or there is something, it's not like you want to build a company, at least you are trying to go in that direction, you have to start thinking, what are the different levels of TRLs you have? What's the market you have? It is inevitable that you cannot really build a company without understanding what kind of market you need to go after and what kind of competition you have. Team assessment, it is very, very critical to understand what your team will look like when you're thinking of SBIR. Because typically the PI within the university who is a faculty member, they are not leaving their job and going to the company. It's typically what we see are the students, the grad students, postdocs, who are the one who are taking the role of a senior technical person in the company, CTO, or could be the interim CEO when the company is founded. So when you're looking at something like that, you need to make that decision that what is my team? Now you can go and work in a company for a short amount of time by working with the university's compliance and take a leave of absence. There are mechanisms to do that, but that's not a permanent solution. So you really need to start thinking, should I partner with an external startup company to do this work, or should I go ahead and find a CEO that who I can work with, who has sold a venture in my space and bring that person in and I become the CTO? Or do you have a graduate student or a postdoc or PhD who wants to finish their doctoral dissertation and will go and want to work in the company? So team is the most critical thing, and most of the failures where I've seen within a reasonable time why we could not go ahead and form a company was the team was just not there. And there are practical challenges too when you form the team. In the engineering, we see that as a very common problem in both science and engineering is sometimes the students who are coming here are on international visa. So for them, converting that to a US citizenship is not such a quick process. These are practical challenges that you might have somebody very happy to do it, but they just cannot. There are situations where they have a job offer from Apple or a Qualcomm of someone where you have to convince them that, hey, stay back for 3 more years and take the risk. So you have to start thinking through those processes when it comes to team. And then one of the things that we try to do is integrate all of that information. It takes sometimes a few months to go through that iteration. It's not something you do in one day. And basically, we try to take advantage of certain programs at that time. And I will talk about the programs like NSF, iCore, or iSight, which have become almost now an accepted pathway before you go to SBIR and STTR from an academic environment. And what that does, it really helps you to validate the market. It is not technical validation. It is not telling you a technology is good or bad. What it is trying to help you with is, who is your market? Does it exist? Do they care? And what steps you need to do better understand the needs of the market? And that's the process it does. And then there is a set of advice we gave about the conflict of interest and board of regents approval. Once we feel comfortable during this step where the PI feels, okay, I want to do this, I think we have a team, the technology, there's an IP that's going to give us some competitive benefit. And we might want to do an NSF, iCore, or iSight, which is a short program where you are actually, you get paid to do that program. Then you move on to the next stage, which is start thinking about the commercialization plan, which agency to go after. So now you are looking at really the details of what kind of agency that you feel is going to be the most suitable for your application. For a lot of our inventors or faculty here, you already work with one of the agencies, NSF, DoD, NIH, and you know the program managers that have worked with you before. Now, they might not be the SBIR program directors or program managers, but most of the time, they're very happy to provide you the contact of their colleagues within the agency who are doing SBIR. And that's what we always suggest. Reach out to the program managers and program directors, talk to them about, does this topic fit the solicitation? What is the timeline? How much money do you think, should we come back in? Do you want to go completely at the top of the budget? I mean, the program managers are not committing anything, but they can provide you some trends that are happening within the agency, because there are a lot of external factors which are affecting. Last year was a very different year for a lot of these investments. There's a lot of money was reallocated towards emergency response. So program manager, when you talk to them, you get those kind of ideas. Certainly, the funding strategy we start thinking about, non-dilutive SBIR, STTR, dilutive. If you're a software company sometime, you don't need to go through a 3-year cycle or 2-year cycle. You can quickly go out, raise money and get to market, because in 3 years you might be obsolete because the technology cycles are so short. So it really depends on your technology. And then once you are at a point where you feel, okay, we are good to go ahead and start a company, there are a few things that we really start talking about, which relates to the system policy, comes to conflict of interest, board of regents approval, and external employment. And I will touch upon that later in my presentation. So in the third phase, you have a company, you have formed a company, you have applied for an SBIR, you have a team, you understand the IP process within the university, you have now at least the basic foundation of something what you call an SBIR company. And that's the point at which we start looking at, what's the execution plan? Because what looks like an end in this process is really not even the beginning of building a company and taking it to market. But that is the point at which you have to make decisions that, do I want to be the CEO of the company? Do I want to stay as a CEO? And these kind of key decisions you have to make. And after that, we stay engaged. As I said, I have worked with multiple system companies. A lot of them have gone on to raise money. Quite a few of them are shut down because they have failed in this cycle of competing for the capital, both at dilutive and non-dilutive stages. So again, we will share the presentation. You don't have to worry about the exact stages here, but again, for our inventors, this is really the process that you need to think through it as a roadmap, that as you go through research program, what are the key things we have to really have the conversation with your commercialization office or folks like myself and really make some decisions. So in the next few slides, as I close out, I'll just talk briefly about, as I said, few of the things that you really need to start considering. NSF I-Core and iSight. Now it is started with NSF I-Core, it is now with DoD, NIH. Lot of the agencies are adopting I-Core and iSight program. The graphics, what you see here is from National Science Foundation, but you can see that they have these 5 programs, PFI, I-Core, STTR, and SBIR. All of these programs are available, purely focused on commercialization. They really want the NSF-funded PIs to start thinking about how you can make an impact in the market by applying to these programs. DoD has an I-Core program, which is $70,000 for 9 months. NIH has one, but the NIH typically gives it to phase 1 companies. So different agencies are doing that. At Texas A&M, we are an I-Core node. We have an iSight program. We have an I-Core program. So if you are an innovator within A&M's system, you certainly have access to all of those programs. And for that, you don't need to have NSF funding. We have regional programs now, which typically provides you the what you call the license to go after the programs if you don't even have an NSF funding. If you have NSF funding, you can go directly to I-Core. If you don't have NSF funding, you do the iSight program or the Nodes regional program, and then you can access I-Core, which gives you $50,000 over a 7-week period to go and do market validation. So this is the first one. Number 2, you need to understand the process of invention disclosure. Now, why this is critical? Because this plays a very important role in developing your IP strategy. Now, if your goal is to just create one single invention and hope that it's going to get issued as a patent, really that's not what happens in the real world. For a startup company to go out and raise a significant amount of capital, you need to have a portfolio approach. And that's the reason we want the inventors to understand that when you disclose the technology, what happens internally. So internally, there's an export control review. Then it comes back to the commercialization offices, the licensing managers assigned to that. There's an intellectual property action taken. And next cycle is more of a feedback loop. We start talking to the licensees, and that feedback is very important. At that point, you might say, I want to start a company. We will license it in our company. Whatever be the process, there is a very streamlined process internally for all inventors. If you are part of Texas A&M system policy, your IP is owned by A&M system. So certainly there's a process here which is very critical for developing your strategy, for taking it to an SBIR process and beyond. And one of the things I'd like to say here is typically I never encourage people to form a company for getting SBIR. You need to form a company with the real goal of building a product and taking it to market. So anything you do internally really helps you in towards the long-term goal and not for just getting an SBIR. It gets you through an SBIR. But if you have a strong IP portfolio and a plan to license it at a point where you can now build on top of what you have in the academic institution, that gives you a lot of leverage when you go for fundraising. So that was the second one. So company formation and beyond. So once you have a company, now there are certain things you do here for SBIR, which you will typically not do if you're raising a large angel round or a venture round. So few of the things which are required, because since you will be taking a funding from the government in terms of registering, there is a compliance issue. So once you incorporate the company, there was a question before in terms of, what is, or what's the decision point of LLC or C corporation. Now, if you go to an attorney, that certainly will be a 2-hour conversation, but I want to keep it simple here. Mostly in my experience, you can have any of these, LLC or C corporation. One is the cost aspect. LLCs, like Texas LLC, is very cheap. You can incorporate over the weekend at State of Secretary of State's office website once you have the article of incorporation. C corporations are desired when you are trying to build a venture funded company, because it provides a structure where you can issue equity, where you can build a company, option pool, and all of those things. Now they can be done with LLC too. So don't get me wrong, a lot of companies which are still LLC. But if you have a desire to build a company which will require a lot of funding, and you will be raising a lot of venture funds, chances are you will need a Delaware C Corp down the line. But at some point, when you're starting, it's a decision you make that, okay, I find with an LLC, if we see a certain level of success in 2, 3, or 5 years, we might convert at that point of time. But again, there is a further discussion required when it comes to this one, but I hope it just provides you a little bit of flavor at where LLC and C corporation comes in. You have to register your company with IRS. You get an employment identification number, which is again required for an SBIR application. You need to have a bank account, a company bank account, not your bank account. Then you have to get to these 4 registrations. A Duns and Bradstreet is a Duns number. System for award management, which is a government award management portal, where you have to go in with a bank account. Why you do this? If you win the grant, if you receive the money, that's the portal through which you will see all the transactions happening to your bank account. And then for each agency, there could be some specific databases by themselves. The research.gov is for NSF community, but you have to check for each of the agencies you plan to go after that, how you want to really apply through based on their requirements. And then there's an SBIR company registry, which is required. Again, these are all government requirements. So when you're thinking of a company formation, the first step is certainly finding a name, who are the founders of the company, incorporating it. But for being compliant for an SBIR STTR, you have to go through this whole cycle. Once you are done, you're done. Means this one-time process. Once you have that, then every time the cycle of a grant submission comes, you can just go and submit it on the fast lane. So this was the third one. A few things, more of nuances in terms of how you need to think through and what you should and should not do. Certainly you need to think about SBIR. It's a lot of work. It's not simple. It's a phase 1 is typically 6 to 9 pages. NSF is 15-page document. DOD is a 20-page document. NIH is a 6-page document. So it's quite a bit of work, technically intensive. But I know, as an scientist, that we can write those documents. We write it for grants and other things, so you can certainly produce them. But you have to see, is it aligned with your goal of the company? Then certainly you have to think of, if you're an external company, do you have the technical competence? Do you have somebody who is the principal investigator of the grant, who has the resume to go through the review committee at the federal agency level? And certainly then access to resources, what kind of opportunity you are trying to address. Is it incremental or disruptive? And one of the key things where a lot of startup companies have challenges who work with SBIR is trying to understand the gap between phase 1 and phase 2. If you have a full-time employee and there's a gap of 9 months between phase 1 and phase 2, what do you do with that person? And that person needs to be paid. They have a family. You need to have a plan. So it's just not applying for the grant. This requires some holistic thinking, that how you want to really build the company, what kind of workforce you want, what kind of resources you want, even if you are going after phase 1 and phase 2, because there will be gaps. And the most critical thing, you cannot spend your SBIR funding in funding your IP. So you have to be very, very critical, very, very careful about that. If you have a large IP portfolio, which you're inheriting, which certainly gives you a lot of leverage in raising money down the line. But you have certain agreements with the universities where you have to pay some monetary past patent costs and these kind of things. Can you fulfill those obligations? You need to think through. SBIR objectives, I hear it all the time from people. They want to do sometimes, like market research, tweaking the product, go after some kind of, small testing that they cannot do. Typically, being in multiple review committees myself, they don't go through the panel very well. You need to be very, very careful in bringing to the table something that, we are coming to SBIR not with a high risk program, but something which can be done. Now there are thousands of SBIR given. Can you find an example where someone got funded? Absolutely. What I'm trying to tell you is what typically program director tell the review committees and what is required or mandated by the program. So again, it is very good for something high risk where you have high risk chances of failure, but it is not good when you are trying to do some incremental development of an existing product. Typically, SBIR is not the best way to go. You should at that point go after angel funding or venture funding to address that kind of a need. And the small nuance at the bottom, grants versus contracts, you will see a lot of SBIRs are both. They are either a grant or a contract. DoD does a lot of contracting, a lot of NSF, NIH, they mostly do grants. So the typical difference is, in case of grants, they are really trying to provide you the resources to go out, solve some critical technical bottlenecks, go out to the market, raise more money, and commercialize it. In terms of contracts, in a lot of cases, like in DoD, they sometimes are your customer. So they really provide you some very strict deliverables because the goal is to see that you go through phase 1, phase 2, and ultimately to phase 3, and really start building out the company. So you need to be careful when you are looking at solicitation. It's a grant or a contract, because depending on that, you have to plan and do things. You have to have a good feel. Again, you don't need to be expert, but this is where your commercialization office helps you. But as a company or as a PI, you need to have some fundamental understanding what will it take for that IP to move to your company from the university. Now, these are not terms, these are just certain terminologies which are typically a part of an IP transaction. We are very happy to explain the details. We give the basis why we do certain things in a certain way, because what we deal with in the university has such a long lead time to market. They are high risk. There are really no right numbers, but certainly we are very happy to talk with you to give you a feel about why and from where these numbers are coming. And same with the external companies. We deal with a lot of startup companies who don't have the experience of licensing technologies. We are very happy to explain to them the logic behind why we are doing certain things and why some of these terms are part of a license agreement. And this is my last slide. This is very critical, very important for our Texas A&M system faculty and all inventors. There are certain things you have to do if you make a decision to form a company. Our system policy is extremely flexible. This is one of the most innovation-friendly system policy that we have, because I have sat on the board of multiple companies with other universities, and I can tell you this is one of the most innovation-friendly system policy, but you need to abide by the system policy very carefully. Conflict of interest disclosure. Once you have a company formed, you have ownership in a company, you need to disclose that. I'm sure we all have received the emails from compliance office to finish a disclosure. And this is an annual process. So you have to mention the name of the company, how much equity you own, all the details. Board of Regents approval. Now, this is important because if you are an inventor and you plan to form a startup company, which is eventually going to license the technology in the company, if you want to serve in a CEO, CTO, or COO level, which you absolutely can, you need to get Board of Regents approval. Now, this is an approval process. There is not something where people are evaluating you for as a fit for the CEO or COO. We certainly want you to be a good fit, but it's an approval process that you have to go through. And we really work with all the inventors through our offices, but there's a timeline involved because the board meets quarterly. So if you are saying, I want to sign a license agreement tomorrow, but if you don't have the Board of Regents approval, you cannot do that. And again, a lot of these points, as I said, this requires a follow-up conversation, and very happy to do that. And last one is external employment. If you are employed in any company, if you're receiving any funding as an employee of the company, or you have a role in the company as an advisor or any of those things, a lot of you do consulting, so you know about it. So you have to do the annual external employment disclosure. So these are the 5 things I said in the last few slides. If nothing else, I always encourage our innovators within the system and also the outside companies that this is really the process. This is how the innovation system functions. We are here to help you. We certainly want you to succeed in this process. SBIR is something, it's a matter of luck. Sometimes you win it first time, but I have seen companies mostly after 2 or 3 efforts, they have made it to that first phase 1. So in closing, I would say you keep inventing and innovating, understand the market. Certainly, we don't need to do that for our research applications, but things are changing. Private, smaller companies are doing disruptive work, so you need to have a good understanding of what's out there. Understanding of IP, form a good team. Certainly, end of the day, that's the most important thing that will get you funded is your team. What resources you need, what you have within the system, what you need to go out and get it from them. And again, ask for help. There are plenty of people around you who are ready to help. Entrepreneurs are very happy to help you because somebody helped them when they were struggling. So we are all here to help you. And certainly if you make a mistake, don't repeat it. The outcome will be same. So with that, I will stop here. That was my presentation. Any specific questions, I'm happy to answer. Chris will talk about things outside the SBIR, STTR, what can make your company more attractive to follow up investments. So I'll be here till the end for any panel questions too. Thank you.
Thanks, Saurabh. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Will you stop yours?
So I'm assuming I am responded to Ali's question, but again, Ali, you know me well, feel free to reach out to me for any clarifications.
Because you should be able to share your screen without him stopping it. It'll just take it over.
Yeah.
Got it. Yep. There we go. All right. Howdy, folks. Oh, let me go ahead and get things kicked off here and arranged so I can see my own slides here. So I do want to say a big thanks to Tees and Tamu IP for hosting this today, especially Beth and Lene for all the legwork putting this together and for wrangling the speakers like me to get ready for this. This is something that's very important to me. I've worked with dozens of companies that have successfully and unsuccessfully gone through multiple SBIR programs in my career. And I do believe that this is a critical program for our knowledge-based economy in the United States. And this is something that our country does great in the innovation and commercialization realm. So I'm passionate about this beyond just my day job. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background in a second, and that'll make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to be, my presentation is a little different. Listen, I don't have a background and a great knowledge like Lene and Saurabh do on the specific details of these programs. But what I do have is experience in working with companies in filling the gaps, those complementary areas that can, help these companies be successful. The SBIR program, while it is a great program, it has limitations. It is not a panacea for startup companies to get funding or support. It requires a holistic plan that involves additional resources, whether that be funding, leadership, mentorship, and other areas that are going to help fill in those gaps. So my goal today is really to plant some seeds for some question and conversation. I'll tell you, I've already been impressed with the number of questions and the type of questions we've gotten in the chat. So please keep those coming. I'm gonna, hopefully inspire a few more questions that I'll try to either answer live or in chat or in follow-up to today's presentation. So a couple of the topics we're going to go through is the role of entrepreneurial support organizations, that as they play in both SBIR and STTRs, how SBIRs impact fundraising strategy for companies. That's fundraising outside of the SBIR themselves, and then talk a bit about those complementary funding sources. So why am I up here chatting about this? A little about my background. I'm an entrepreneur. I started out as an entrepreneur, actually founded a company in my dorm room while I was going to A&M in the 90s. It was a fast growth company. Those of you that are Aggies have probably heard of the Aggie 100, one that's in its inaugural year for the fast growth of the company. And I ultimately sold the company to a couple of my employees and transitioned into consulting with other technology companies. Did that especially in helping with fundraising strategy and providing fractional leadership for tech startups in this region, many of which partnered with Texas A&M University. Then I helped to run an angel network, and this Aggie Angel Network actually was an affiliated and continues to be affiliated with the university, specifically to help companies that are spinning out or affiliated with Texas A&M University. I also helped build a coaching operation as part of this. And one of the things that we realize is we don't need to just help these companies a few weeks before they think they need funding. We need to start much earlier. And that actually resulted in a role that I took with the organization that Saurabh is with now, Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station's Office of Commercialization and Entrepreneurship. I was an entrepreneur in residence there for almost 5 years and was part of the founding team of the Texas A&M New Ventures competition, which Lene told you a little bit about before. And I'm going to echo her comments. I would love to see many of the initiatives that and companies that you're thinking about building come into this program. In fact, one of the most successful sources for companies, the ones that end up walking away with tens of thousands of non-dilutive funding from our organization, from TNVC, have come out of the SBIR program. In fact, we started soliciting to and we're sending reminders out to companies that have received SBIRs because we know that you are a great source of excellent companies and candidates for this program. And really quickly, a plug for TNVC, this is unrestricted funds. So that's an opportunity for you to actually get some money that can be spent on anything that will help with the growth of your company. Check it out, it's texasnvc.org. Now I have taken on a role as of January 1 with Texas A&M University Innovation Partners. I actually work for Mike Scherer, who started kick things off today. I'm the director of new ventures, and I'm helping to build an entrepreneurial support organization that specifically serves Texas A&M University system spinouts. And I'll define what an entrepreneurial support organization is a bit as I go through. But basically, it's helping companies like yours that either are startups specifically formed around technology spinning out of Texas A&M, or startups that are looking to do in commercialization or sponsored research with Texas A&M. And I continue to chair the Texas A&M New Ventures competition and work directly with Lene and her office in running that every May. So I'm going to pull up the chat box just in case things are still coming up as we talk here, or the Q&A box, sorry. So a little bit about Texas A&M University Innovation Partners, where I work, and this specifically my role in New Ventures. We're building a team and an organization that's going to serve these spinouts, providing the following things. We're going to provide mentorship and coaching, incubation acceleration. Many of you are probably familiar with incubators and accelerators. I'll talk a little bit more about that today. Providing support around programs like I-Corps, SBIR, and STTR, because we know those are critical components to commercializing startups. And then providing relationships that lead to funding. Sometimes we're actually planning to provide some direct funding to our pre-company partners. Think gap funding, helping provide funds to employ graduate students or researchers before the company can afford to provide them funding. Now, that's something that's still very, very new, but we are planning on building a program around that. Then also providing indirect funding. This is after that company has been formed. Could be through a partnership with a group like Aggie Angel Network or a VC or a fund that we're hoping to build in the future that we see some of our peer universities build. We're also the co-host of the Texas A&M New Ventures competition in cooperation with TEAS and the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship, which is part of the May School. So I mentioned ESOs. These are entrepreneurial support organizations. And I use that term rather than just saying incubators and accelerators because there is a ton of overlap between these programs. It's really sort of in the eye of the beholder that it's defined differently depending on who you talk to. Incubators, accelerators, programs like the Capital Factory or up in Austin. Now they have an office in Houston. Geekdom down in San Antonio. Safe Tech, which helps with first responder and defense technologies here in the Central Texas region, as well as TMCX, which is a very successful accelerator program affiliated with the Texas Medical Center in Houston. Those are all great programs. Both Lene and Sarah mentioned the Small Business Development Center. I would say engaging with the SBDC is not an optional. If you're considering a startup, and especially if you're considering either a small business loan or an SBIR program, both of which are great areas of expertise that the SBDC brings to the table for free. So I would highly recommend that you reach out to the SBDC in your region. Everyone in the United States has an SBDC partner that serves their region and will help you prepare your company for funding, whether that be non-dilutive programs like SBIR STTR or dilutive programs like or bank-led programs like SBA loans, or even in preparation for angel funding or other dilutive funding. And then Sarah also mentioned I-Corps, and I'm going to tell you a little tidbit. Hopefully there's nobody on that's going to get me in trouble for saying this, but I actually attended an SBIR conference 4 or 5 years ago, and someone asked the panel, which included program managers from DoD, NSF, and a few other agencies, what the success rate of companies applying for SBIRs without an I-Corps experience versus those that had gone through I-Corps. And one of those program managers actually said that they knew the number and was not willing to say it because it was so much higher. So I'm guessing that 80% plus of those I-Corps program folks that have gone through the I-Corps program are actually getting SBIRs once they apply. The I-Corps program is an experience that will help you immensely, not only in your current endeavor, but in future ones, in terms of engaging with customers, understanding the market, and really starting the early ideas of putting together a business model around your technology. All of those are things that are going to be asked in the various SBIR and STTR applications. And if you're able to claim having emerged from I-Corps, whether it's from the agency you're applying for or another, it will give you a huge leg up because they know you've done your homework. It is a rigorous program. It takes a minimum of 6 weeks for you and your team. That there is engagement required by the PI as well as an entrepreneurial lead, which is usually a graduate student or postdoc. And it also requires an industry mentor, which is a role that I've filled several times or that I have helped fill by finding someone in my Rolodex that has experience with a specific industry. So definitely check out I-Corps and seriously consider it if you are at all considering an SBIR. So let's talk about how SBIRs impact fundraising strategy. So Beth, I think you have a poll question, and I'd like you to answer. I think it's the next one, Beth. Do you believe you need investor funding? I'd like to know, just generally, it's fine, answer unknown. So actually I see only true and false. So you know what, just answer. All right, do your best guess. Do you think you're going to need investor funding if you get an SBIR STTR? Oh. Give you a second to answer that. How do I get to see the results, Beth? Or are you going to flash them up?
I will announce the results. Waiting for a few more people to answer. Actually, that may be everybody.
There's other sources of funds. It's not only you can SBIR or investors are not the only area you can get funds. You can get it from competitions or other non-dilutive sources. Get loans.
It says that 63% of our audience says that that statement is false. That
Wow.
So if I have an SBIR or an STTR, I do not need to secure investor funds, and they say false. Is that correct?
There is no perfect answer. Certainly there are companies that have not needed investor funds that have received an SBIR. But I will tell you, it is rare. Companies that go through an SBIR are going to need additional capital from somewhere, all right? And science and engineering-based technologies often need substantial capital. Now, you might be able to get some funds through other sources, whether that be competitions or other non-dilutive grant sources. Maybe the founders are going to be willing to put in money. But guess what? If a founder puts in money, you better consider that an investment. You are now an investor in your own company. So your initial team, I would consider as part of that true answer to that question. So I'm not going to say it's 100%, but I will say that it's extremely rare. And here's why this is important if you're considering an SBIR, because most of the funding agencies are going to ask you about your future capital needs. They're going to look to see if you have thought through this. Have you considered where your additional funding is going to come from? Because SBIRs have limitations on how their funding can be spent. It is primarily on the R&D side of the house, but you're going to have legal costs, whether that's the foundation of your company, the founding of your company, paying for an attorney's fees, paying for your licensing with the Secretary of State. There are going to be legal costs in terms of implementing your intellectual property strategy, things like filing costs for your patent or for your provisional patent, and then ultimately for your conversion. You're not allowed to use SBIR funds to pay for those things. What about paying for some of your personnel that are not involved in R&D? There is a piece of funding that can come from SBIR. I think it's 7%, if I remember correctly, for most of the agencies, but that is not going to be enough. So I guess the point that I'm trying to get across to you is that other funding will be needed, all right? You're going to have to come up with a source. And the most common source that I've seen for science and engineering-based companies that have significant capital needs is from an investor. And it's usually not only from the founding member, because unless you as a founder are independently wealthy, being the sole source of that investment funding is probably not the best idea. Getting other investors involved brings with it some side benefits as well. Oftentimes investors play what I call a smart money role, where they'll actually get involved in advising or either unofficially or in an official role as a board member in your company, which will, since they're an investor, they have a vested interest in your company succeeding. They're going to be willing to make introductions to other investors, to folks within the industry that can help you, that you can partner with, or even to customers when it comes down to that point. So I would highly urge you to consider your fundraising pathway, engage with an entrepreneurial support organization like I talked about before, If you're commercializing out of Texas A&M University, certainly engage with my office. This is something that we do. We'll help you think through your fundraising strategy and what the different sources for funding you're going to need. It's important that you think several chess moves down the road. All of these different sources I'm talking about, SBIR, STTR included, want to see that you've thought those several chess moves down the road. They don't want you to come with a half-baked proposal that says you only need their money and you are going to take this thing all the way out to market and be the best thing since sliced bread, because they know that that is not realistic. And the burden is going to be on you to prove why, that you've thought that all the way through. And this is a competitive process. So if you come with a half-baked proposal that says, hey, I'm not going to need anybody else's money, and that program manager or the review committee knows that this is a capital intensive process that's going to require years of work and financial support, maybe hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to get all the way to market, they're going to turn down the proposal. You're going to end up not getting that SBIR. So there are a couple interesting complementary funding sources that I want to talk about here. There's something called an NSF Phase 1B or a Phase 2B. I believe that some of the other agencies have these programs, but NSF was really the originator of this. These programs are matching sources when you're in between the phases. So say you've gone through a Phase 1 and you're going to raise some money. Maybe you're going to raise $100,000 from investors. And in order for you to be eligible for these, you actually have to get investment money. It can't be even purely from a founder. It has to be from an external source, because they're looking for, to give you an academic equivalent, the equivalent of a peer review. They want to know that investors are willing to put money at risk. And then the NSF will come in and match up to $30,000 after a successful Phase 1, or up to $500,000 in a successful Phase 2. This is non-dilutive funds that can be used however you want. All right. Now, investors also love to see successful SBIRs, Phase 1 and Phase 2 completed and ahead of when they put in money. All right. So these things, it kind of works in tandem with each other. You get a successful Phase 1, well, you go to your investors and say, hey, I got this Phase 1, I got $150,000. Help me to leverage your investment money and help me bridge this gap between Phase 1 and Phase 2. You'll get a better return for your money because I don't need as much investment funds, because I've gotten this Phase 1 and now this Phase 1B and maybe eventually a Phase 2B. So investors love SBIR and STTR program. And by the way, whenever I say just SBIRs, I'm also talking about STTRs. I use those terms interchangeably. I know that's not technically right. It's just what's stuck in my brain. So that's all I had as far as prepared slides. I'm going to take a quick look here now at the Q&A. I've seen a couple of questions. One comes from Brent. Do these programs require membership fees, etc.? Okay, so I assume you're talking about those ESO programs, those entrepreneurial support organizations that I was talking about earlier. The answer is some do, some don't. Okay, SBDC doesn't charge you anything. That's why I say hands down, go talk to them right away. All right, there are programs that are nonprofit incubators and accelerators. The I-Corps program, for example, for pre-companies, that actually is a non-dilutive grant. So that actually pays you to participate in that program if you're accepted. But that's prior to the company forming usually. A lot of those incubators, think about like that TMCX program down in Houston, they oftentimes will charge a nominal fee. It's more like rent because they're actually providing you some space and access to physical resources. It's usually small or subsidized by that organization. In fact, one of the cool things about TMCX is the majority of their funding, if not all, in some of their programs is funded by parking down at the Texas Medical Center, kind of a neat funding source. There are others like Capital Factory up in Austin and now down in Houston. They take a small equity piece, I think it's 6%, but then they will give you access to the majority of their programs without any money changing hands. And I will tell you, giving up an equity piece may sound scary. Giving up 6% of your company for something intangible like, mentoring and access to programs. I'll tell you that programs like Capital Factory are very, very selective. So when you turn around and go pitch to investors later on and you tell them, hey, Capital Factory or TMCX or whoever accepted me into their program, they are going to be more likely to invest in your company at a higher valuation because they know, again, you've been reviewed by a peer, you've been accepted into a competitive program. So in short, yes, sometimes there are fees. I will tell you that there are bad eggs out there. None of the companies none of the incubators and accelerators, I would say, fit into this, but there are some that have taken, too big of an equity piece or charged too much for their programs. I would tell you to do your due diligence. Look at some different programs in your area that serve your area. Talk to the SBDC about the ones that they recommend. Maybe talk to your local economic development organization. Certainly, if you're within Texas A&M University, come and engage with our office because we can provide many of the early stage resources. And then through programs like the Texas A&M New Ventures competition, we've developed relationships with incubators and accelerators across the state of Texas. We know which ones, not only that will be a great fit for your company, we also can help give you a leg up in applying to that organization by making a personal introduction. Because we work with those programs every year to help companies successfully get funding through the Texas A&M New Ventures competition. So I also got a question from Jean Cheng. Would it be okay for your team to follow up for more direct interactions? Yes, I'm happy to talk to anybody, whether you're affiliated with Texas A&M or not. I don't know whether you're affiliated. I think I recognize your name, so I'm guessing yes. But I can work with you professionally if you're part of the Texas A&M University system and one of the agencies or system entities that we serve, or I'll connect you with someone that can help you. So sure, feel free to follow up with me. Just Google me and you'll find how to contact me. It's just cscotty@tamu.edu. I'll type it in the chat or someone else can. Just send me a note. So that's all.
Sorry, Chris, somebody had asked a question about how to get more information about Aggie Angel Network, and I had sent them the link just to the website, but is there anything else that you can tell us about Aggie Angel Network that might help somebody to get connected with them?
Sure. One of the best things I suggest you do is go watch. Before you apply, ask to attend as a guest. We have an open invitation to all commercializing faculty or potentially commercializing faculty or graduate students, and most entrepreneurial oriented students as well are welcome to attend sort of in the peanut gallery. I would encourage you to attend that before you apply, because it really will be an eye-opening experience as to whether you are ready to apply and pitch to that group. So that's my advice before you apply. It's an open application process. I would encourage you to consider applying to Aggie Angel Network if you believe you need angel funding. It's certainly one of the most science and engineering friendly angel networks in the state of Texas. I won't pretend that it's huge and going to be able to provide $1 million funding round themselves. They usually write checks in the 100 to 500,000. They fill rounds in the 100 to 500,000 range, mostly on the lower end of that. But what is cool about this is they're a great first stop. If you're able to get funding from someone that's friendly like Aggie Angel Network, they can then syndicate to the Houston Angel Network or the Central Texas Angel Network, which are number 4 and number 5 angel networks in the country. Actually, collectively, they provide almost as much funding as some of the other 47 states in the United States. Of course, California and New York provide the lion's share. They're number one and two. Texas is number 3, and it's really because of the active alliance of Texas Angel Networks in the state of Texas. So if you are not affiliated with Texas A&M University and not in this region, there is likely an angel network in your region. I would urge you to check out the Alliance of Texas Angel Networks. That's ATAN for short. And that has a list of all the angel networks in the state. There's also the Angel Capital Association that will provide nationwide resources. But really, there are no geographic requirements for Aggie Angel Network. So, somewhat selfish plug, since I used to work there and I'm still a mentor for them, I would tell you, go ahead and apply. There's no downside. Any other questions that I missed, Beth?
No, I don't think so. If there's anyone still in attendance, if you have a question, we have several more minutes. You can pop it in the Q&A. If you have a question that you would like to actually say out loud, you can use the raise your hand feature down at the bottom, and I will unmute you. But I do want to remind you that this is a public event. It is being recorded, so we want to make sure we don't make any or say anything that we don't want to say publicly. But if we haven't answered your question, or if you think your question is a little bit more detailed, feel free right now to raise your hand. Lene, do you have anything while we're waiting for questions that you want to add?
I don't. Thank you for asking though.
Okay. Sarah, is there anything that you would like to add as we're waiting for more questions?
Yeah, I had a few questions about kind of relevance of the technology that the company or the person invented is working on, and does it fit the phase 1 and phase 2? And the challenge is, as I said, when I wrote the response back, that there is no binary response to that, because everything has a layer of details. But certainly that's why we encourage you to talk to the program manager or program director, because different phase 1s are different sizes. Some of the AFWorks or the Air Force ones are now as quick as 3 months, $50,000, and NIH, some phase 1s can go up to $300,000. So it also is a spectrum of, sometimes these dollar figures, which depends on what kind of milestones that you can go out and achieve during these phase 1, phase 2 applications. So that's why it's very important for the PI and what PI is principal investigator for these grants to really look at number one, the problem they're trying to solve, the fit with the agency, the technical scope, because you have to keep in mind the total size of phase 1. You just cannot put together a grant where you're talking and solving a problem which costs $10 million and apply for $250K. Because you have to remember those who are in the review committee on the phase 1, as you go up phase 2 and beyond, these people have themselves start multiple companies before, either through SBIR or venture funded. So people can see through your technical development plan. So it's very important for you to be ambitious. At the same point, your ambition has to align with the amount of money you have in phase 1 and phase 2. So that's kind of my primary response to that broader class of questions, that every technical problem is great, but see, does it fit? Do you have the background to be the PI, number one? Do you have the team to execute? Number 3, can you achieve in 6 months or sometimes 12 months that scope of problem that you are proposing? And end of the day, the program manager or program director is not going to tell you yes or no. They will give you enough indications that, hey, come back with the revision of the specific aims, the revision of the milestones, because typically the projects of this size and scope, you will need to have a different source of funding. Or it is too basic science, you need to go back. This is not really translational. So these are multiple things, and that's why, as I said, means we are all happy in cases you have more detailed questions to respond. But reading the solicitation is the most important thing that you can do to really kind of respond to some of these questions that you have. So, yeah, but very good questions. Most of the questions I had, certainly people are, thinking deeper than just, am I eligible or not? So that is certainly a good.
So I saw something that I'll add a little further color to. There were several questions kind of around the building of a team, especially as applies to faculty members. And, I will, echo and expand, I think it was on Saurabh's comments, that a faculty member can be part of a founding team of a company, but is rarely in that role for very long. I mean, unless you're planning on leaving academia, or severe, limiting your role in your academic career. That just doesn't happen. And, to put it very bluntly, oftentimes the skills that you bring to the table as an academic researcher are very different than the skills needed to successfully grow a company and pitch for investment. They are looking, often the investors are looking for diversity in management and past experience. And so are the SBIR and STTR reviewers. They're looking for you, even if you don't have that experienced CEO involved with the company yet, they're looking for you to acknowledge that you need to add that person to the team. All right. So, one of the things that I actually urge folks to do when they're putting together a pitch deck, if they, they're a technical founder and they don't have experience, prior company founding experience, that they put up an empty shadow box on their pitch deck with that CEO role or that president role there, and you say something to the effect of, I am going to use the funds that I get if awarded in this program to hire that person. All right, because I know that I'm the technical person in the company and that I need the business person. Another little shameless plug. The Texas A&M New Ventures competition is open to the public, all right? And one of the reasons that we do this and encourage faculty and graduate researchers to attend is because rather than taking my word for it on this, you'll get to see the types of people that are pitching and succeeding in that event, which is meant to mirror an investor event. And you'll understand the types of skills and people that you need to have involved in your company to be successful. It's free. We're going to be doing it virtually for the general audience this year. And it's May 19 and 20. I'll either Lene or I will stick the link in the chat.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to TNVC this year, Chris. I think it's going to be really fun. I attended last year virtually and it was really good. All right, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions or comments. So let's see, we have a few more minutes. So I'm going to launch another poll. And we'll see those of you who've been on the whole time, if you know the answer. This was from Lene's presentation. It says, I'm a faculty member. I would like to start a company around my research and apply for an SBIR. Do I have to be employed by my new company to be the PI on the grant? So I believe, Lene, yeah, you covered this. So we'll see what people have to say. And panelists, you can vote as well, I believe.
That's a trick question at 5:45.
I should have said the disclaimer that there would be a test later. I apologize. I didn't say that though. This is an open book test, sort of.
Hey, Beth, I wonder if we can ask my question again. I want to see if anybody's changed their mind.
We can.
Well, your question was kind of a double negative. Like people were saying it's false. So that was actually, they are agreeing that you do need, if you go back and reread it.
Oh.
All right. So I'm
Because I
going
got my wording to Beth too late.
see.
No, I don't know that it was.
All right. We had about half of people voted. So, oh my gosh, it was tied. 8 people said yes, and 8 people said no. So, Lene, what's the correct answer?
The correct answer is yes, you have to be employed at the company. If it's an SBIR, that's the operative acronym. The STTR, you don't. You can be the PI in the lab. But for an SBIR, that you have to add, the PI has to be at the company. You don't have to be at the company 100%. I think it's 50% of the grant or 50%, something like that. But yeah, for an SBIR, you have to be part of that organization.
All right, that was a good one then. All right, here's another one. I'm not ready to have a company just yet. Can I apply for an STTR to further my research? Can I apply for an STTR to further my research? I bet if I had done these right after your presentation, Lene, people may, we've covered a lot of information in this 2 hours.
Yeah, this is a little cruel, isn't it?
It is. And it's already after 5. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and end that one. They had 5 people said yes, 8 people said no. What was the right answer?
What was the question again?
I'm not ready to
start
form a company just yet.
Yeah, so you cannot apply for an STTR and just be a faculty researcher. These programs will not direct any funding directly to a research lab. It can only go to the research lab through a company that has got a license agreement and a sponsored research agreement with a research lab. So the main thing to take away is you have to have a company, or the goal to have a company, before you apply for one of these. You don't actually have to have your company formed when you apply for your grant. It's going to probably look better, and Saurabh can help me with this too. It's going to look better if you do, but if you get your grant, if you are awarded an SBIR or STTR, then you are going to have to fill out a set of confirmation paperwork. And at that point, you will have to have your company in place. So it's better to start working on it before you get the yes, no answer, or be ready to scramble because you have to fill out a eligibility, paperwork that says, yes, I have a company, and so on and so forth. And I know that Saurabh covered some of that already in his presentation.
I mean, it's, there is nothing wrong if you go, form a company, but end of the day, we have seen enough sample set in terms of, success standpoint. And if you form a company with the intention of really commercializing your idea, there is enough motivation to keep the ball rolling.
Right.
And that is reflected in your work. It doesn't become a pain, but again, like a lot of things in life, you can do it. It's nothing wrong or illegal. You can form a company, you can win. I have seen companies who have gone on from phase 1, phase 2, but they have no plans to commercialize it. But then there are companies who really want to commercialize, struggling to phase 1 and phase 2. So they need a lot of motivation. So they are sticking to it. So again, coming back to it, absolutely plan well. The success is not guaranteed, but it makes it much easier because writing these applications, phase 1, phase 2, they take effort. And not only applications, other things around the company will need. All of these things need effort. And on a positive note, I think, if you feel, how far you can go, Qualcomm was an SBIR company to start with in 1985. So if you think, there's a US company which is globally successful, Qualcomm, and, their first money was in 85, where they were developing a small terminal for a logistics company for putting on a truck for transportation. And so, so things can, go anywhere from a startup with the first phase 1 to you can be a public company with a multi-billion-dollar market cap.
So next week, and I know Beth might already get into this, but next week we will have a panel that is going to focus on writing the business and commercialization segment of an SBIR / when I say SBIR, I mean both generally. And that is the imperative section to do well on. You need to do well on the entire submission, but if you're a faculty or a graduate researcher, you know how to write the technical side, but you are not going to have a successful SBIR unless you are able to clearly lay out the commercialization path in the business section. And so next week is going to be very valuable. And it's what Saurabh said, you don't want to go out and just start a company because you're trying to get STTR funds to fund basic research in your lab. That's not going to pass the sniff test at any agency. So you need to really have your, I want to have a business around this research hat on when you apply for an SBIR.
Okay, and Chris, we relaunched your poll and we had 55% of the people that voted said that that was false. So they do need to secure more funding.
Yes.
That's correct, right?
Yep.
I'm just looking to see if folks were, if I changed any minds. So I guess a few, though the wording in that one, Lene's right, is a little confusing because it's kind of a double negative. So,
yeah,
but yes.
Oh, yeah,
Glad
sorry.
to see you changed at least a few minds.
Yeah. All right, one more, and then I will let you guys go. I want to apply for an SBIR or an STTR, but I haven't formed my company yet. Can I still apply? I think we just answered that one, actually.
Yeah, we did.
We did.
Maybe it
All right.
was,
So let's see if people were really listening at the end of the day. And I believe, let's see, the answer to that question is, I'm gonna guess this one. We'll see if I was listening. The answer is yes, that is right.
correct.
Yep. You can still apply even if you have yet to form your company.
But if you get it, you better be ready to hit the ground. Because they won't send you your money unless you're legit.
All right, well, if we have no more questions, I don't see anyone who's raised their hand. I want to thank everyone who's still with us. We know it's late and it's probably been a long day and a long week for you all. So we will see you again next week. As Lene mentioned, we have another great webinar session planned for you next week. So if you have registered once, you don't have to register again. And there will be a follow-up survey for this session. So make sure when you close out that you give us that feedback so we can always continue to make these better for everyone. And we will see you next week.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. This has been terrific.
Thank you
Have a
all.
good night.
All the best. Bye-bye.